Welcome to Pluralsight. I'm Ross Pagurtis. In the second module of Introduction to Firewalls, we're going to take a look at Network Address Translation, or NAT. Our goals for this module are going to be to take a look at the history and the need for NAT. Where did it come from and why do we need it? I want to take a look at what is NAT doing to my packet. What's happening to my packet as my message traverses some kind of NAT boundary? I want to take a look at what is being manipulated in that packet header. We're going to examine how dynamic NAT works, how static NAT works, and how port address translation works, which are just three names given to doing NAT, which is literally just manipulating information in the packet and segment headers. Let's jump right in with history of NAT. I'm a big history buff. It's really interesting to see how this stuff evolves over time, because in 1981, we did not have a problem with a shortage of IP addresses. Engineers had been working for years earlier to come up with this 32-bit IP address and a system of classful allocation where if you were a big business, you would get essentially a /8 address. If you were a medium-sized business, you would get a /16 network address. And if you were a tiny business, you would get a /24. By the mid-80s, they realized that this was a terrible idea, and finally in 1991, they actually published a request for comments for it in 1287 saying, yep, we have too few addresses, we're going to need to do something, and we're going to need to do it in a hurry. So then by 1994, that's when NAT was first proposed in RFC 1631. Now NAT, this network address translation, or network address translator, as the RFC calls it, engineers have been working on this for numerous years before as just a proof of concept experiment. And in 1994, they actually proposed it as a potential solution to the too few address problem. However, the two engineers here specifically said this right in the RFC: NAT has several negative characteristics that make it inappropriate as a long-term solution and may make it inappropriate even as a short-term solution. This is Evang and Francis back in 1994. So 22 years ago, the engineers that were trying to solve this problem were saying, yeah, this is probably not a good idea. However, it is the reality of the world we live in today. So it does work, and it has to. 1996, we had the introduction of private addressing, and this allowed us to have an address space that let us reuse that IP space from business to business. Now, in 1996, not all organizations were connected online. As a matter of fact, in 1996, I was working at my first job as a structural engineer, and I actually had to provide my own dial-up internet access if I wanted to do any kind of research online. So in 1996, a lot of organizations weren't actually connected to the public internet, but they may have had a need to do some IP networking within their organization. Hence, the 1918 addresses were announced. This is the 10.000/8 space, the 172.16.00/12, and the 192.168.00/16. So these were all of our reusable addresses that allowed us 3 years later to be able to introduce NAT to translate from a private address to a public address. Then 2 years after that, we officially introduced port address translation, or PAT. PAT is what most of us are using at home to get out to the internet. Typically, when you purchase internet services from a cable company or from the telco, you're only given one public IP address. When you go get one of those routers from Amazon or your local retailer, when you get a wireless router to hook up to that, that's using all private address spacing on the inside, that RFC 1918 space. And we're doing PAT, port address translation, to convert that message so that it works out on the internet. PAT lets us have lots of devices inside on a private network sharing one IP address on the outside. 2016, 22 years after it was first officially proposed, NAT is required. It is mandatory. Without it, our networks are just not going to work. Business systems require it, and it has become a fundamental component of firewalls and routers alike. IPv4 address space is very limited, and until we do that massive conversion to IPv6, which we're not quite ready for yet, it's slowly happening, but It just has not gotten momentum yet in 2016. Because of that very limited space, NAT is going to be continually used probably for the most of your career if you're watching this video right now.